Good day to you. There's a lot of reasons not to interact with people who are different from you, people who belong to another culture. And that's really what this chapter is all about. It's about barriers to interacting with other people or barriers to intercultural communication. For example, I'm walking past a fraternity right now, the Sig Pi fraternity. There's a student in this class who's a member of that fraternity. What can we say about fraternity brothers? Well, you join a fraternity to buy a friend. Fraternity parties are all about meeting girls. Fraternity parties are loud. They're obnoxious people. They're meatheads. They're people who are not that great academically, to put it mildly. These are all stereotypes, one of the barriers to interacting with other people. And they're not necessarily completely untrue, but they are sweeping in their scope. And they prevent us from getting together with other people and communicating. And if I was to think like that about my neighbors here, the Sig Pi fraternity brothers, I would never wave to them. I would never have a chat with them. I would never lend them a tool, ask them to help me move a piece of furniture, never ask them about how they're doing in school. Wouldn't interact with them. And so this chapter tries to get at the things that prevent us from getting together with people from other cultures. There's not a lot to say about this chapter. I'll be covering the major concepts. There are quite a few case studies in the chapter, which I'm going to invite you to read on your own, especially so that you can help prepare yourself for the quiz. But for the most part, it's a pretty straightforward chapter. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about that's a potential barrier to interacting with other cultures is anxiety. That feeling that you get inside of you, that your heart's pounding, your adrenaline's going, you don't want to make eye contact, you're nervous about your confidence, maybe even fearful. That's anxiety. And it's easy to feel that way when you go to another culture. When you take a plane flight and you land at an airport and all of a sudden everything looks different. The language is different, the colors are different, people walk, behave, they act differently. It's very intimidating to go to another country. That's one of the reasons why we take tours that involve tour guides, because those tour guides help us to find out what the rules are when we land somewhere. But anxiety is kind of normal. It actually can be seen as a good thing because it helps keep you alert, keeps you paying attention to what it is that you're observing in a way that makes you focus on it. But it can also get in the way. When I first went to Mexico, I remember I was a pretty young guy, and when I suddenly got there and the cars were older, we had crossed the border from California into Tijuana. Not that Tijuana is Mexico, but it is a part of Mexico. Tijuana is a border town, but it's, like a lot of border towns in countries, it's catered to the people on the other side of the border, the U.S. So there's a lot of people that are coming at you in Mexico, asking you to come inside their shop. And it's even kind of physical. They can come out and kind of like, oh, come on, they touch you, they kind of push you into their shop. Come on and take a look. Almost free. That's what a lot of Mexicans say. That's a Mexican sense of humor. And I remember the anxiety that I had as a young guy going into Tijuana and thinking to myself, wow, am I in a situation that I'm going to not be able to get out of? But eventually that gave way to understanding that this is the way that Tijuana is. It's not necessarily the way the U.S. is, or necessarily the way that other countries are, or even necessarily the way that the rest of Mexico is. Nevertheless, at least in the beginning, stopped me from, really opening up to people and interacting with them. So that's anxiety. The next barrier that I want to talk about is assuming similarity. Assuming similarity instead of difference. That's what this chapter is all about, or that's what this concept is all about, is when you assume that other people are automatically like you, and you therefore behave in a way that ends up being offensive, even though you didn't mean it, because you didn't recognize that there's actually a difference. Let me let this bus pass. Actually, it's a truck. Okay, so an example of this is, I remember when I went to Germany, and I saw a lot of people in Germany looking like Americans. A lot of Germans have come to America. A lot of Germans settled in Pennsylvania. And they have a certain look to them, I guess you could say. It's a stereotype, but they do. They're big people, generally speaking. They also happen to be people that are very methodical in the way that they go about their daily routines. Germans are neat, orderly. That's, again, I'm getting into stereotypes. But when you look at Germans, you can assume that they're like Americans from the vantage point that there are big spaces in Germany, and it's a wealthy country by standards compared to other countries. And so you can assume that Germans will waste things like Americans do. It's very typical for us to go to a restaurant, and some people will go to a fast food restaurant, and they'll order fast food, and then they'll get ketchup, and they'll take 6 ketchups and use 2 of them and throw them away. Or they'll eat a big meal and then throw away the food that's left over instead of eating it all. In Germany, that's not typically done. In Germany, you don't waste things. It's kind of true for all of Europe. So you order exactly what you're going to eat, and if you have anything left over, you take it home. So assuming similarity over difference can get in the way. In that case, you could have assumed that in Germany, people don't waste. It's a difference there. Take a look around, see what people are doing with their food, and then act accordingly. All right, next up is the idea of ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism. If I were to say to you, hey, you know what? Let's end class right now. I'll give you an A. I'll give you an A. All you have to do is tell me the name of the Prime Minister of Canada. That country that's our northern neighbor, our biggest trading partner, the country that's the second biggest country in the world, country that's only 6.5 hours away, driving distance, country that we have a lot of entertainers from, like Justin Bieber. You'd be able to name the Prime Minister of Canada, right? Right? No, you can't, can you? Why is that? Well, it kind of gets back to every time you go to watch the weather on television and you see the map. Do you ever see Canada on the map? No. Do you ever hear sitcoms refer to the Prime Minister of Canada as a joke? No. Do you ever hear the Prime Minister of Canada being brought up in everyday conversation? No. His name is Justin Trudeau. So why is that? It's because of ethnocentrism. It's the idea that the country that you're raised in, you perceive as being at the center of the world. Ethnocentrism. That's what that's all about. And so if I were to say to you, for example, hey, are you an American? Your answer is going to be yes. But you know what? If I ask a Mexican if they're an American, they could say yes too. And so could a Canadian. Because we all live in North America. So why are we the only Americans? The answer is we're not. So when you grow up in a country and you don't get to travel that far, it's easy to see that the center of the world revolves around your country. It's a barrier to intercultural communication. Moving on now, we come to stereotypes, something I've already mentioned. Unfortunately, stereotypes is stereotyped in and of itself. Stereotypes get a bad name. Stereotypes, as I'm trying to communicate, are not necessarily untrue. For example, are there lots of fraternity brothers that lift weights? Yeah, there are. Can that then lead you to say that fraternity brothers are meatheads? No, you can't say that. Stereotypes are assumptions that we make about people based on our previous experiences. Oh wow, it's going to be really noisy. I'm going to take a detour here. The new dormitory going up. Yeah, stereotypes are quick judgments that we make about people based on their race, based on their ethnicity, based on the country that they're from, based on the category of people that we assume them to be. And like I said, they're not necessarily untrue. It's just that they can block our interaction when we assume, for example, that Russians are going to be really mischievous. Russians are going to be diabolical. Russians are going to be hacking. Yeah, they're going to be hacking into our computers. So I'm going to be very wary of Russians. Well, too bad. That's going to stop me from talking to the Russian that I meet on the streets of New York City, where there are lots of Russians. Now, moving on to the word that actually does have an automatic negative connotation, that is prejudice. Prejudice is when we make assumptions about people based on a superiority that we believe that we have over them, but we have assumptions about them that are negative. And so Mexicans are assumed to be illegal immigrants, for example. People who believe in Islam are often labeled Islamic terrorists. Those two words are often mentioned together. People who are from China are mysterious, but mysterious in a way that they are untrustable, untrustworthy. This is what prejudice has to do with. It's assuming bad things about somebody based on where they come from. And then finally, probably the worst barrier of all, is racism. Racism, which is often tied to skin color. There is often a perceived hierarchy in the world. It's talked about in the book. Chapter 2 discussed it at length, where the white skin is at the top. It's at the top of morality. And below that, the darker the skin gets, the more racist the views become. Where we get to the blackest of person, that person is said to be perceived in a racist world as being inferior. You know, it's nonsense, of course. And actually, in my lifetime, I'm very proud to have lived in a lifetime where I've seen a lot of racism dissipate. And actually, people today, they don't necessarily identify as white, black, Asian. They don't necessarily identify that because we have so many mixed race people right here in this class. We have a student who said, you know, most people can't believe that I have Puerto Rican heritage, as if Puerto Ricans are supposed to be looking, you know, really dark skin. I don't know if you know this, but tons of Puerto Ricans have blue eyes. Happens to be a gene that made it into the pool of Puerto Rico. So racism is another barrier. To assume that a class of people is inferior is in essence what racism is about, because of their skin color and their race. Okay, so I said that it was going to be a fairly short chapter that's going to wrap up this chapter on barriers to intercultural communication. I hope you have a great day.